Now, it's no longer news that the elections of the Nigerian Bar Association has been won and lost. We'll bring you a recap of how that went down, but let's kick off the program with our conversation with the former president of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association. Boma Alabi was the first woman president in the over 50-year history of the Association of Lawyers from 54 countries. She has over 30 years' experience in corporate commercial practice and is passionate about judicial reforms as well as replicating global standards here in Nigeria. Here's our chat. I want to start with the NBA 2020 elections. First, did you vote?
Of course, I had to vote. I mean, this is our elections and it's important we participate in the process. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to do so, and one must do their civic duty. So yes, I did vote.
Okay, so tell us about it. How long did it take? What was the process like?
Well, I was quite puzzled that we had to be re-verified because I voted in the last elections as well, and that was electronic. So once you're already on the system, why are we having to be re-verified as lawyers again? That I found a bit puzzling. It means that there was some sort of lack of continuity between the previous one, and there should be. Yes, obviously we have to show that we have a current practicing certificate as well as our current, that we've paid our dues. And that was all done before we got onto the list. So I thought the process was a bit cumbersome. It could be easier. Certainly, if you've been verified previously, we shouldn't have to do it every time we have an election. There should be some continuity.
But the actual process of voting for the election, how long did that take?
Well, that was pretty straightforward.
Okay.
I got an email. I clicked on the link. It took me straight to the point for voting. Oh yeah, by the way, the email came from an unknown source. So it wasn't an MBA source. And initially I was a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? I was a bit suspicious. Because you don't just want to click on anything. But it was on the right day. It said vote for the MBA, and therefore I clicked. It took me on to give the various candidates, and I made my choices.
Now we're electing a new NBA president and a new leadership at a time of the global pandemic, a time of the new normal, remote proceedings, and all. Drawing from global trends and best practices, what skills would you say that the Nigerian lawyers need for managing their practice and generally for thriving in a coronavirus environment?
The same skills that we've always required, which I think the pandemic in this jurisdiction is bringing to the fore, which is great. That is, you can't do without technology today. You have to be digital. You have to be able to use emails, use the tools, the usual working tools that we're all used to, PDF documents. These most basic things that everyone else is using in most of the Commonwealth jurisdictions. A lot of our colleagues here are still finding it difficult to adapt. So in that sense, the pandemic has given us a silver lining because they're all being forced to use what for me are basic work tools and should be for every lawyer. And the MBA as well, fortunately, had already started in that process of going more electronic, more digital, and it can only continue in that direction.
So what are the lessons that lawyers, for you, what lessons should lawyers learn from this pandemic?
Lawyers from this should learn to be multidisciplinary and proactive. So for instance, once the pandemic started and it was clear that this was going to be a global issue, we looked at it and said, okay, how do we assist our clients through this process? So we proactively reached out to them with some information and advice, all the contacts within our database. That's meant that we've kept pretty busy despite the courts not being in session, because we're advising on the impact, industrial relations, all sorts of, it's impacted on business in all sorts of ways. And they need our advice. So we need to be proactive. We need to learn to keep a database. We need to learn to keep contact details of our clients, so that we can communicate with them electronically. I know this is, for us, is commonplace, but for a lot of my colleagues, it apparently isn't. And I hope that's the one thing that comes out of the pandemic for this jurisdiction, because it'd be good for the clients, it'd be good for all of us.
Let's talk about agenda setting for the new leadership of the bar. What for you are, if you were to pick the 3 top things that this leadership should be focusing on? What would those things be?
3 top things. One is when we talk about welfare of the younger lawyers, I don't actually like the word welfare because it implies that we're giving them some sort of palliative or something. That's not what.
Handout.
Yes, that's not my. So that's not quite what I mean. But I want to see a situation where when young lawyers come into the profession, they're treated fairly, they're adequately rewarded, they're protected from sexual harassment, they're protected from exploitation by seniors. Yes, you have some young lawyers who are not serious, but if you're the employer, you have the choice. If they're not serious and you've provided them with all they need to do a proper job, you can let them go. But give them a level playing field, and the profession has to intervene.
How?
Set a minimum wage. That's what happens in other jurisdictions. Yes, take into consideration the fact that different parts of the country have different sorts of practices and different levels of income. So I practiced in London for many years. London waiting meant that solicitors or trainees who were being trained in London were paid more than those who were being trained in, say, for instance, Bournemouth or Wales, because you earn less in Cardiff, your outgoings are less than if you were in London. That can be applied here. So if you're in Lagos, you can expect to be paid more than if you're in Damaturu, for instance, or in Owerri. It's not rocket science. We owe it to the young people coming into this profession to treat them with dignity, to teach them, and to pay them well whilst they're doing so. They, of course, owe us a duty when given the opportunity to work hard, to upskill, because once you have a wig and a gown, you are a professional. Don't come into a firm and think I'm still a student. Number 2 is access to justice, because you see, the fact that justice is so delayed in this jurisdiction is impacting on confidence in the system. And the less confidence the litigating public have in the system, the less likely they are to use it, which means fewer clients for all of us. And ultimately, people taking the law into their hands, self-help, because they have no confidence in the system. And it has got to that point. If I'm waiting 6 years, 4 years, 7 years to get a matter concluded, then clearly something is very, very wrong. And the Nigerian Bar Association has a duty, which that duty is on the leadership of the bar, to engage with the system, all stakeholders, to ensure that this changes. I don't see why we're still, for instance, appealing interlocutory matters all the way to the Supreme Court. It's a waste of time. The third thing is to have a proper directory of lawyers and ensure that, standards are met, a minimum standard in terms of practice. And if they're not, then those who are infringing or not meeting those standards are speedily dealt with. Again, it's about confidence, because that will build confidence in the profession. And it's,
So you're saying standards, are you talking about ethics?
Ethics.
Okay.
Ethical standards,
Okay.
professional standards. We have we're called a noble profession, a learned profession for a reason. And we have to meet a minimum standard in the way we interact with each other and the way we interact with our clients. And for me, it has to be a priority of the leadership of the bar. So lead by example, and also make it easy for those who consume the services that we provide to hold us accountable for the services or for the breach of our ethical standards in the way we interact with them.
In the weeks leading to the elections, I had conversations with all the presidential candidates. And one of the issues that came to the fore was that the bar has lost its respect. You know, even among members of the public, before, when a lawyer gets into a space, you know, there's that respect, there's a lawyer, a learned person is here. But we've lost, according to a lot of them, according to most of the candidates, the bar has lost that respect. What do you think that the leadership, the new leadership of the bar can do to regain public respect and trust also in the profession?
You know what? Yes, the bar has lost its respect. The bar is to blame entirely, because guess what we do in this jurisdiction, which is totally unacceptable, and the leadership of the Nigerian Bar Association can put a stop to it. Lawyers are litigating their cases in the public space, on the pages of newspapers, in places, forums like yours, you know, fora like yours, I beg your pardon. And it's entirely wrong. You cannot come out there and continue to comment on matters that are sub judice, and they know how we've seen them do it constantly. They will imply and make inferences on the, how do you say, the integrity of judges because matters have not gone their way. It's totally unacceptable. The leadership of the bar has to take steps to ensure that these things stop.
Another issue that some lawyers are worried about is the propriety of the Nigerian courts going on vacation at this time. I think a lot of people felt that it was some sort of forced holiday when the pandemic came and, you know, there was restrictions and the courts were not open. But then to now go on vacation when life is gradually returning to almost normal, some people have issues with that. What do you think?
In fairness, I mean, the pandemic happened and no one was expecting it. But if you recall how overworked our judges are in any case, in most parts of this jurisdiction, certainly in Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, and most of the cities, you would find that even though the courts were not sitting, they were writing judgments, they were writing rulings, they were effectively working in that period. They were taking urgent applications, and therefore they are entitled to their vacation. You know, if they do not take the vacation at the appropriate time, then when will they take it? So you have to think beyond just this next 6 months. Are you going to ask the judges to work right through from now until next vacation? And would that be fair, you know, on them? I don't think so. So I think it's fair that they take their vacation. The normal state of play applies, so there are vacation judges. If there's anything urgent, they'll be dealt with. And in the interim, the new rules are coming into play on virtual court sittings and so on, so that by the time we do start in September or October, those new rules, they've had a chance to look at them and begin to implement.
So it's interesting that you've touched on virtual court proceedings, and one of the things that came to the fore, I think, was when I covered the first Lagos virtual court sitting, was that issues of funding for the judiciary, electricity, power, internet connectivity, and all of that some lawyers have identified as stumbling blocks to the effectiveness of virtual court sittings. How do you think that we can tackle that, considering the fact that in the budget, the funding for the judiciary continues to decrease? What's the way around that, and what's the role of the NBA in, I don't know, maybe asking for more funding for the judges?
So I've been consistent in advocating for additional funding for the judiciary. I think the funding for the judiciary is woefully inadequate. And you can't pay the price of Kia and get a Rolls Royce. I'm sorry. So if we want a Rolls Royce, we have to pay for it. And this is an opportunity, because we need to put in place the infrastructure to enable the courts deliver virtually, and in so doing ensure that our people get justice in their commercial matters, get on with their lives if it's to do with their domestic affairs, divorces, custody of children, if they're in awaiting trial for criminal proceedings. All of these things impact on the everyday life of everyday people. So the courts, the judiciary is, to my mind, the most important arm of government out of the three for the ordinary person. And therefore, it should be adequately funded in order to deliver justice in time for the Nigerian public. And it is not the role of the judges to go cap in hand or stand on the streets or to advocate for funding. That's the role of the Nigerian Bar Association. That's the role of the bar. We are the voice of the bench. And the president of the Nigerian Bar Association should make it a priority to advocate for proper funding for the judiciary and knock on every door, bang down the door if need be, until we get what we want, what we know is right for the society.